Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. The official press conference for this weekend's action in the women's welterweight division between reigning champion Sandy Ryan and the challenger Mikaela Mayer, the former champion.
Size.
You see, there's not that much of a difference in height and length, that in terms of the tail of the tape, they're just about even or close to even, but Sandy definitely does have the bigger build.
She's the bigger woman, the natural welterweight, though Mikaela Mayer has had time to further acclimate, to fill out, and she's filled out in all the right places.
She's done a very good job of selling this fight because Sandy Ryan by herself, she's not much of a talker. She's not as quick-witted, doesn't have the gift of gab.
Mikaela does.
The caveat is, when you're the showman, or in this instance, the showwoman, when you're the outspoken fighter, you do put pressure on yourself to deliver. Deliver on all the promises you make in the build-up.
Everything you said, you've got to back it up.
This is a very important fight for Mikaela Mayer, a chance for her to regain the traction in her career that it felt like she lost in the last 2 years, fighting abroad, fighting in the United Kingdom. There was a purpose behind that, a rhyme and a reason, but now she's back stateside, she's back in America, and she has the advantages that she didn't have abroad.
No excuses.
She can't make any if she loses. Sandy Ryan is the away fighter in more ways than one.
No excuses.
Things did used to be a lot more cordial between Mikaela and Sandy. That backstory about how Kay Karoma basically tried to double deal.
Train a fighter that also doubles as a potential rival for Mikaela now that she's a welterweight.
Before it came to that, things did used to be a lot more cordial between Mikaela and Sandy. They used to compliment each other all the time.
Not anymore.
So many are convinced that Sandy's just going to go in there and ragdoll her, overpower her. I myself, I'm not convinced. If you've been paying attention to my coverage of this fight, I am going with Mikaela Mayer to out-hustle Sandy Ryan, to win a points decision against a difficult fighter, a powerful fighter, but I think she can do it.
The undercard.
This fight is going down in New York City, so it's no accident that they have a Brooklynite, an exciting one, in Shushu Carrington on the undercard. Also on the undercard, Puerto Rican fighter, potential Puerto Rican superstar, Xander Zayas.
Anybody knows anything about New York City knows there's a large concentration of Puerto Ricans in the tri-state area. So it's not by accident they have a Puerto Rican fighter on the undercard. An exciting one, a promising one.
Xander Zayas campaigns in the junior middleweight division, one of the deeper divisions in all of men's boxing. But it still feels like he's operating in a separate division to everyone else, that there are some fighters that I would like to see him in there with, especially now that he's already been in there with a former champion in Patrick Teixeira, that they are stepping him up.
He looked good with Patrick.
He didn't get the knockout, he didn't get the stoppage, but Patrick Teixeira is a stubborn customer. He's a tough guy. Not easy to get him out of there.
Sporting a professional record of 19 wins with no losses, no draws, 12 knockouts.
Xander is in a very similar place in his career to Virgil Ortiz. Virgil, who was just in there with Sergey Bohachuk.
Fight of the year candidate.
I want to see Xander in there with somebody like that. Xander, who was last in action in June of this year. He fought 3 times last year, and he will have fought 2 times this one. After this Damian Sosa fight, if he wraps this guy up early, there's still time to get him back out there at least one more time before this year is out. Nothing big.
A focus on Xander.
Standing in at about 5'10", close to 6 feet tall, 22 years old in the junior middleweight division. I don't know that Xander will ever get the chance to fight for a title at this weight. Perhaps not at this weight, but in the next one. Perhaps at middleweight. Xander's one of the fighters I identify as the future of the middleweight division.
The reason for it, 2 of the 4 titles at this weight are over there at the PBC. Sebastian Fundora's got them. That could soon be 3 if Tim Tszyu beats Bakram Murtazalia.
The only other title at the weight is held by Terence Crawford, and Xander Zayas versus Terence Crawford, that's not a conversation. That's not a realistic fight in terms of where they are in their careers. They're polar opposites. Xander's really just getting started, whereas Terence is approaching the end. So based on that, I don't think Xander gets the chance to fight for a major title at 154. What he's doing here is little more than garnering experience, making his bones, but he won't fight for a title there. I think he'll fight for a title at 160, and that will help to liven things up in the middleweight division that sorely needs a shot in the arm. New blood, fresh faces.
I'll go as far as saying that because I don't think he's going to get the chance to fight for a title at 154, he should probably just move up now. Acclimate to 160. Make your bones at 160. Get a head start on all those guys at junior middle that you know one day will move up.
That's Tim Kazoo. That's Virgil Ortiz. Can you imagine Xander Zayas versus Virgil Ortiz at 160? That can be a mega fight.
The next chapter in the Mexico versus Puerto Rico rivalry. Say 2 to 3 years from now, I can see that.
In the distant future, in the not so distant future, what I would like to see is for Xander to take on some more former champions. Say a Liam Smith.
He used to hold the WBO at 154.
Or what about a Brian Castano? We haven't seen or heard anything from Brian since he got knocked out by Jermel Charlo. If and when he comes back, and I think that he might, I wouldn't mind seeing Xander Zayas versus Brian Castano. Valuable rounds and valuable experience to be had in a fight like that.
At 154 or 160, they could do that. The bottom line is, I want to start seeing Xander with some of the players at 154.
Might be too hard to get the big names like a Fundora or a Zoo, but you could see about getting a Kurbanov, maybe a Liam Smith, maybe a Brian Castano.
Maybe.
Or what about a Jesus Ramos? I could really go for a Jesus Ramos fight next year. That's a Mexico versus Puerto Rico kind of fight. I could go for that.
I want to start seeing Xander fight some of the familiar faces at 154, 160, just anywhere around there.
That'd be good. For now, he's going to be in action this Friday on the undercard of Mayer versus Ryan, and we'll see how he makes out with Damian Sosa. Elsewhere in the junior middleweight division, you may have heard a day or so ago via Barboza Box, Errol Spence Jr. versus Sebastian Fundora, Cowboy Stadium or Cowboy Training Facility, end of January 2025. Looking forward to it. Do or die for Errol, in my opinion.
I didn't figure this fight would happen before the year was out. Given where we are now, we're at the end of September. That leaves only October, November, and December.
That would not leave the PBC on Prime much time to promote the show. Errol himself has not announced who's going to be training him moving forward, since he's not with Derek James anymore. He doesn't look like he's match fit, fighting fit, like he's getting ready for a fight based on some recent images of him and Brian Norman chopping it up.
Looks kind of pudgy, soft in the body.
So I didn't figure the fight would happen. The fight with Sebastian would happen before this year is out, if the fight happens at all, because it's ill-advised.
The latest.
They're gonna do it next year, at the end of January. That's really not any better. That's actually worse. Because the longer it takes to make this fight, the longer Errol waits to come back, the more difficult it could be. And if they're going through with this, if this rumor checks out, what that means is that Sebastian won't be fighting Terence Crawford.
His mandatory challenger via the WBO.
That if this is really the plan, then at some point between now and the end of January of next year, Sebastian might be stripped of the WBO title. Emphasis on might be. It depends on what or what doesn't happen between Terence and Canelo.
It's the other part of this conversation. If Terence can't get the Canelo fight and he stays at 154, he can press the issue with the WBO to either force Sebastian into a fight or force him to vacate.
Based on this, it's looking like Sebastian might have to vacate, leaving him only one alphabet title to bring to a Spence fight, the WBC title.
So it looks.
This is what Samson Lukowicz wanted all along. This is what Samson said they would be doing immediately after Sebastian beat Tim Tszyu. He said Terence will have to wait because they want to fight Spence.
That's what he said.
So, realistically, under these circumstances, what kind of odds could you give Errol Spence Jr. against Sebastian Fundora? Boxing insider Rick Glacier doesn't like his chances. Boxing insider Rick Glacier said, Errol Spence Jr. is returning in January versus junior middleweight champion Sebastian Fundora, and Spence will get destroyed by Fundora. total destruction. By fight time, it will be 18 months of inactivity, drinking and all after the beating Terrence put on him. That one is going to be ultra ugly.
Is that the way it is?
In my previous video, I talked about how I never really liked Errol's chances at junior middle based on what I started seeing at welter, that if you didn't have the power to knock down or knock out a Mikey Garcia, you ain't gonna have no power up there at junior middle.
Well, what about what he did to Ugas?
Let me tell you something about Yordenis Ugas. His claim to fame is beating a Manny Pacquiao that hadn't fought in 2 years. His claim to fame is beating an inactive Manny Pacquiao in his 40s as a late replacement that popped up after Spence got injured. So, that when Spence comes back and beats that Yordenis Ugas, you can't blow it out of proportion. I'm sorry to say, Ugas is not an elite fighter. He never was. He was just a guy in the right place at the right time to fight an old Manny.
Errol Spence beating Yordenis Ugas should have never been blown out of proportion, but some took that as a sign that Errol's back. He's all the way back. He's the eye collector. Wait till he gets in there with Terrence. Watch what he does to Terrence. That's what people were saying at the time.
Not me.
I never liked his chances against Terrence. I never liked his chances at junior middle. That sustained attack, that body attack that worked for him at 147 may not work for him at 154. Those are bigger guys that are used to taking a bigger punch.
Don't let the Sebastian Fundora that fought Tim Kazoo long distance, long range, using his height, using his length, don't let that Sebastian show up.
It's going to be that much harder for Errol to land punches, to get close to this guy, to just get close enough to him to land some punches if that Sebastian shows up.
Sebastian presents an awkward challenge for anybody and everybody at 154 because he's unusually tall and long for that weight. There are not that many 6'3" or 6'4" junior middleweights out there. It's really just Sebastian. The guys at that weight aren't used to contending with that kind of height and that kind of length.
Most of them.
Much less an inactive former welterweight champion, a welterweight. How many guys
6'4".
6'4", 6'5" has Errol ever had to deal with?
Tack on that he's a southpaw.
It's a situation where everything about boxing and everything I've seen in boxing under circumstances similar to this one tells a story where Spence gets cooked. Spence gets destroyed. That if he's fighting this guy, he's cashing out.
He would have to be. You don't want to take a tune-up fight in between? You don't want to shake the cobwebs off? You want to go right in with him?
It's not because Sebastian is so great a fighter. It's because Sebastian is a full-fledged junior middleweight who's been fighting and Errol hasn't.
You don't get off the couch. You don't come back. 18 months. To fight a guy like this, if you do, you're cashing out.
You're just scraping up the last bit of change from the couch cushions before you call it a night, before you go to bed. I'm sorry to say, I can't give Errol any kind of odds in this situation. I can't.
If Sebastian decides to use his height and length in fighting long range, it'll be very hard for Errol to even get close to him to land anything. If Sebastian doesn't fight long range, if he goes back to doing what he used to do, that ain't no better.
In the phone booth, Errol will be close enough to Sebastian to land his punches, but so will Sebastian. And Sebastian's used to fighting in the phone booth. That's what he normally does. Whose punches do you think will be more damaging? Errol's on Sebastian or Sebastian's on Errol?
Come on.
I don't get the sense that this is the start of a full-on campaign for Errol. I remember Errol said a few months ago that the next time we see him might be the last time we see him. So he's cashing out.
It'll be a pay-per-view.
The selling point will be that Errol is back. He's all the way back.
To generate the money, sell the pay-per-views, they need an angle. The angle will be, this is Errol's long-awaited, highly anticipated return.
It will be short-lived if this fight actually comes off, if this fight actually goes through, because I think Spence would lose. He would lose. In the unlikely event that he wins. Not really into betting on the underdog stories, unlikely scenarios, improbable outcomes. I'm not into that. But in the unlikely event that Errol Spence Jr. wins, becomes a two-division champion, beats Sebastian Fundora, the Crawford rematch instantly becomes the biggest fight to make at 154. The biggest.
and the most sensible for both combatants. Errol don't get the money rolling the dice with anybody else at 154 that he would get rolling the dice with Terrence again, because Terrence has Turkey now. He's got Saudi Arabian money behind him.
The second fight could be even bigger than the first one was. There are so many out there that are blaming Errol's performance on the weight, that he was weight drained.
That at a higher weight, he'll perform better and he's got a better chance of winning. If he were to pull this miracle off against Sebastian, that would lend credence to that notion.
And fuel the rematch, the second fight, which would easily be the biggest fight to make at 154 pounds. I don't get the sense that Errol Spence Jr. is in it for the long haul. He said as much himself years ago when he said he's here for a good time, but not a long one. No, I don't think Errol wants to run the gauntlet with everybody at 154 if he beats Sebastian.
He's in his mid-30s.
He wants to make his money, take his money, and run. And the best money for him at this weight would be with Terrence.
Now, I don't think this is a likely scenario at all. I don't think Errol beats Sebastian. I think Sebastian might retire him.
What's likelier to happen than not is that Sebastian beats Errol, who's a common opponent between him and Terrence, and that will lend itself to a fight between them. But that fight won't come off. It won't come off right away. If Sebastian beats Errol, he'll move into a fight with the winner of Zoo versus Murtazaliev that I anticipate is going to be Tim Zoo.
A rematch between Tim and Sebastian. That's what they would move to do if Sebastian beats Errol.
And in that situation, I don't really know what Terrence would do. In a situation where you can't get Canelo, can't have a rematch with Errol because he just got beat by Sebastian, and you can't get Sebastian because he's going to have a rematch with Tim, I don't know what Terrence would do in that situation.
Virgil Ortiz fight, maybe?
I don't know. I'm surprised that they're even doing this thing. I really am. But if they are, it can only be because Errol Spence Jr. wants to make a few more dollars, few more bucks before he calls it a career. You don't take on a fight like this under these circumstances where you're coming off a demoralizing loss, you'll be breaking in a new trainer, you haven't fought in 18 months. You can't take on a fight like this and have any real hope of winning. What you're doing is cashing out.
The sales pitch will be that he's back.
He's back in the mix. He's back in. All the while, he's really on his way out.
You'd have to be some kind of a wide-eyed optimist to think that he isn't.